Hello, folks. How's everybody doing? Hopefully, you're doing better than me. And today we have another very, very boring um, lecture. So, if you have something better to do, then don't do it. Stick around. You might learn something. Okay. Today I'm going to be talking about a father and mother duo team, and it's these two folks here, the Hilsters. Okay, and it's Bob and David, father and son, and they are Particle Man, and they run the It's called the John Chappell Society. I call it the John Chapel Society because I relate it to religion, and so chapel is probably a better way of pronouncing that. And then you have a theory based on a G1, G2 particles. They're going to propose particles to do gravity. And by the way, I'm a member of John Chapel Society. I've been a member for now, I don't know, 10 years or so. And I joined, someone invited me some time ago, and I joined and became a member and put my stuff there, the links and so on. I haven't quit, I'm still a member. They broke up from what was it called? The Natural Philosophy Alliance, then they became the John Chapel Society. And they took the database with them, and I ended up with the John Chapel Society. Well, I removed my stuff there because they send me stuff every week where they say, "Look, this Saturday we're going to have so and so speak," and so I usually listen in. Especially what I don't, what I do is contact these people before they talk, and not always, but sometimes, and I criticize their theories. Okay, and that's how it is. Well, anyways, here you see that on the left-hand side, there's someone put a comment a couple days ago in one of my videos. It says, "Why can't we get along?" Oh my God, that's a very big rhetorical question, and I thought I'd address it for once because a lot of people have over the last few years they said, "Bill, why aren't you nice? Why am I not nice? Why do I have to be such an asshole?" That's a big question. It really is. And the first answer to that is that Mother Nature, she loves war. She loves blood. She's a nasty old woman. Okay, she's a nasty old woman because you see it everywhere. I mean, you have predators and prey. She set it up like that, not me. And forget about species. Within a species, you have fighting. Lion fights lion. They don't drink beer and say, "Look, you take over my harem, I'll take over yours. Why don't we be buddies? Let's live together. Why can't we get along?" No, no, it doesn't work that way. The bulls fight, the lions fight. They have to fight, and they have to kill each other. And so people say, "Well, but we're humans. We have intelligence. We can do better." People think that we're the gardeners of Eden, and really we're just another animal in Eden. People don't realize that. They think that because we have this ability to think that we're superior and that God designated us as the gardeners. Okay, so are we any different? Well, look at history. We've been warring ever since. Even before civilization, I'm sure that in the Upper Paleolithic, you had groups when they met, like a clan here against a clan there. They probably fought. They had the worst enemy of another human was a human, just like with the lions. And so we've been fighting forever. If you look through history. Now, what do you see? Well, if you look at history, you'll find that we had kings through civilization, civilized history. We had kings, and when a king died, his son took over. The prince became the new king. It was hereditary, and this created problems over time. We don't have kings today that are. I mean, we do have kings, but I mean, they don't rule anymore, They're just the leader of the billionaires. That's all. But people elect uh, the prime ministers, the presidents, that kind of thing. So it's not, at least that part doesn't seem to be too hereditary. Science, on the other hand, it's been taken over by mathematical physicists, and all these mathematicians, they created a hereditary system. They teach the next generation of mathematicians at places like Cambridge and Harvard, and these become the new kings, the people with power. And the previous generation puts these guys in the right places. They work at CERN, they work at SLAC, the Stanford Linear Accelerator, at Fermilab, at NASA, and they have all these think tanks out there. And they're all manned, they're all populated by people who have inherited what the previous generation bequeathed to them, which is mathematical physics. And so what happens sometimes, like in history, you have grassroots movements, and many times that ends up in revolution. Okay, uh, Louis the 16th, his wife, they lost their heads. They overstayed their stay, and the masses couldn't stand for it, so they finally cut off their heads. Russian Revolution, Lenin and his boys, they went out there and they slaughtered the king, the Tsar. So yeah, sometimes when you overstay your stay, well, then you have revolution from grassroots movements. Whether that's going to happen in so-called mathematical physics, in so-called science, I don't know, because as you know, I have an extinction theory. We're the last humans on Earth, and so I don't think it's going to happen. But that doesn't keep us from trying, right? Okay, so that's one issue, and the other issue on that I want to cover is that the only way that these people stay in power is through censorship. And yeah, when you have censorship, you can't get along. Okay, get along doesn't fit in with censorship. You have this bozo, John Baez. Okay, he works at the University of Riverside, a state-funded institution, and he's got in there his crackpot index, which is used to belittle and ridicule people who come up against who? Relativity and quantum mechanics. You can look it up, crackpot index, you'll find it's against anyone who opposes, these two religions. And so what happens? Here you are paying your taxes. The taxes go to the government, and the government sends the money to Riverside. And here we have the Riverside uh, website, and it contains the crackpot index, which they use to belittle you if you rise up against the kings. So you figure it out. If that is a way to get along. Okay. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, as you can see, what's his name? David Hilster. He's got a little video, and let's see if I can find it here. It goes something like this, and he says, he addresses the Thunderbolts project and the electric universe. Okay, so it's a group we've been talking about a couple weeks ago about Walt Thornhill and his famous electrical guys. Okay, and so what is Dave Hilster's Dave's D? I removed the D because it's easier to pronounce sometimes. I'll just say Hilster or whatever. Okay. Anyways, what does he say? Well, he says the electric universe has a right to present its theory. And I say, no, they don't. Oh, Bill, you're a Nazi. You resuscitated Mao. You resuscitated Stalin. Well, that's politics. See, there's a difference between science and politics. In politics, you can do anything you want. Mother Nature doesn't care. There's no right or wrong way to run a country. There's only interests. And one mafia, the one from Russia, fights against the one from China, which fights against the one from the United States. All these mafias, they control their own territory. And so that's the way the world is run. And Mother Nature doesn't get involved. She says, that's all opinion. It's all interest. It's my interest against your interest. You're rich, I'm poor, I want to overthrow you, that kind of thing. In science, It's a little different. See, Mother Nature doesn't run gravity in 10 different ways. She doesn't do space time gravity over here and space time and particle gravities over here, and then sends gravity waves over here or string and brains. Mother Nature runs her shop in a single, one way only. Okay? Now, maybe none of us have hit it on the nose. Maybe none of us knows how she runs her universe. But maybe one guy knows how she runs the universe, or doesn't know, but proposes the way she runs the universe, and Mother Nature smiles, says, "Oh, this guy figured it out. He figured out how I run my universe." If that guy figured it out, all the others are wrong, according to her. Not according to me, according to her. Mother Nature says all of you are wrong. So there is a difference between science and what I call religion, politics. That's religion. Okay? That's opinion. Science, on the other hand, it's running a given way. Okay, so why don't I think that the electric universe has a right to present their theory? And for that matter, neither does anyone in the John Chapel Society. Where do I get this? Am I a dictator? Well, if I were, I would probably execute all these people. In the old days, they used to execute astrologers that failed to predict, the king was going to lose in battle. So, they should really all put their lives on the line for their theory. Then you'll find out, whether they are allowed to present their theory. They'll figure it out by themselves. Okay, I've got three arguments against why people, just anybody cannot present a theory in science, in physics. And the first one is an opinion. Well, clarify that up front. The other two are more or less subjective. Okay, so let's go with the opinion first. I believe that anyone who presents particles in physics should be tortured to death. They should be executed. They have no right to live, let alone to present their theory. If after 3,000 years of presenting particles, they still cannot explain how this universe works, they cannot explain simple things like magnetism, like gravity, then anyone who presents particles should be executed. There should be no tolerance for anyone talking about particles anymore. The word particle should disappear completely from physics, from science. There are no such things as particles out there, discrete particles. That's an opinion, okay? And what we do at the Rational Science Group, it's closed now, but we used to do this. We have a manual, not a manual, it's a what is that, catalog. And whenever someone has a particle theory, we say, okay, come on in, we'd like to hear it. And we offer them the catalog. And they have different ways of presenting, their stuff. Let's see if I can find it here. Where is it? Here it is. And here's the catalog, okay? And they can choose which way they want to present their theory, okay? And these are the ways they can present it. They can talk to us about all their great big ideas, and these are the way we're going to treat them. Because the motto of the Bill Gates School of Physics is we teach with a baseball bat. Not very friendly, not very tolerant. Okay, we teach with a baseball bat, and so anyone who proposes particles, they should know what they can expect at the Bill Gates School of Physics. Now they have a chance to also recant, and so after a few electric shocks, they might really decide to withdraw their submission. Okay, so these are things that are in our catalog for anyone who wants to propose particles or waves. Anyone proposing waves, we essentially are in the same boat, because you have to remember that particle, so-called wave theorists, they're particle guys. What they have is they're saying that the particles are moving. The only difference between Christian Huygens and Newton, and people say, oh, this guy was a particle guy, this was a wave guy. Not really true. They were all ether guys. They all vouched for the ether. They thought space was made of particles. And so one guy says, look, these particles in space vibrate up and down. Today, well, after Fresnel, we have transverse waves, right? And the other guy said, no, look, the ether's out there and light just goes through it. So that was the only difference. But they all proposed particles. We've only had particles. That's the only proposal that's ever been on the table until we come to my proposal, the rope model, which has nothing to do with particles. Okay. Okay. So the interesting thing about Dave, he says in another video, he says that we can't figure it out. We've got so much information, so many theories out there that it's a mess. What we need to do is get all the people in there. Maybe we can't even do it with a human mind. Maybe we need computers to figure this out. Because it's out of our hands. It's really overwhelming, and we can only solve these problems maybe by having thousands of theorists coming together. Uh, working together, getting along. Who's he going to call? Is he going to call the establishment, the relativists, and the mechanics? Is that who he wants to bring in there? I mean, they haven't figured it out. Where are they going to figure it out now? And or he needs computers. My God, let me make it simple for Davy. Okay. Okay. You can see there's a dark thing in there. That's a magnet. Okay. I use the holders because it's easier to handle these things. There you have it. Now, how difficult can this be? I mean, it's got to be out of this world. All we have is two pieces of metal, and they stick together. Okay? They stick together. So what do we have to do? Well, all we have to do is figure out what Mother Nature put in there, in between these two pieces of metal. And these two pieces of metal, it's invisible, it's untouchable, and all we have to figure out is what's in there. And, a couple weeks ago, I put this little cartoon, Felix, and in the first little video, you'll find that Felix moves his hand. He waves his hand, and a window breaks. Okay, and here it is. Let me show it to you so that you know what I'm talking about. Here it is. He waves his hand, and suddenly the window breaks. Okay, and you say, well, how did he do it? Did he do it by magic? Did he say abracadabra, and did he say some words of incantation? Is that how the window broke? And you can break your head, you can ponder and theorize, and you have all these ideas of how that could have been done. And once you make the invisible visible, and here it is, you can see how Felix broke the window. Oh, he threw a horseshoe through it. But it was so simple. This is kid stuff. This is kindergarten stuff. All we needed to do is figure out, what the invisible thing that he threw was. And here we have the same situation. All we need to do is figure out what's in between these two objects. And hopefully, you don't do it with concepts. You don't say field. You don't say wave. Hopefully you don't say particles either, because I don't know how you're going to explain what particles. And if you don't fill that space with something, and you say it's done by magic then, or you're essentially, in essence, putting spirits in that same space. There's got to be an object. And that goes to my golden principle, as I call it, of physics, the cornerstone of physics. What is physics about? And the first cornerstone is the golden rule. The golden rule is you can't do physics without an object. You need some physical object. If God comes in and he raises all objects from the all the ether, all the particles, everything out of the universe, you have absolutely nothing. And then you cannot do physics. What's going on? What's happening? What's moving? You need a physical object. No one has figured out that in 10,000 years. And the reason I know this is, don't take my word for it. Go to any book of physics, any textbook of physics, see if they start with a golden rule saying you need an object to do physics. That's the first issue. The second one is, has anyone defined what an object is for the purposes of physics? And you won't see that either. You simply will not see a definition of the word object, the word thing in physics. Nowhere. And so I had to define these terms because, no one has done it. And so we have to define first nothing and something. Something and nothing. What is something? That which has shape. What is nothing? The opposite. It's antonym. That which doesn't have shape. Now we can use these words consistently in physics. We have space and matter. Matter, that which has shape. Space, that which doesn't have shape. Okay? And so, people say, well, what do you mean, by it doesn't have shape? Yeah, space doesn't have shape. Imagine God, all-powerful God, right? And he's almighty, right? And he's outside matter. Here's matter over here, and he's outside. He's looking at matter from outside. Well, hopefully he's in space, because if he's, and we say in when it's wrong, because space is not a physical object, but it's the habit, right? Space has to surround God in some way. He's got to be enclosing, he's got to be contrasted against something. Otherwise, he doesn't exist. Poor fellow, he doesn't exist. And here you see it. Here you have God out there, and he's looking at matter from way far away, okay? And so what's the black stuff? That's what we want to know. And the black stuff hopefully doesn't have a limit, doesn't have a surface, okay? And there better be some black stuff if you're going to contrast matter, okay? So when you look out there in the night sky, between the moon and the stars, that black stuff, that dark stuff, that's nothing. And then you have the tiny minds who say, well, there's always something. Because every time we evacuate the chamber, we just get a different reading, a lower reading, but there's always something in there. Well, you have a -3 torr, okay? And that's a whole bunch of particles in a certain volume, okay, in your chamber. Now you pump the chamber down to -7. You removed matters from that volume. Now you pump it down to -12, and if you're in intergalactic space, you get into -16, -19. You got nothing there, essentially. In other words, you have one particle every so often. So when you remove particles, what remained behind? Obviously, you have fewer particles for the same amount of volume. That contrast, you better identify it. And that's what we call space. We call it nothing. There has to be a difference between a -19 torr and a -3 torr. Okay? And tiny minds don't realize that. They never work with plasma, apparently, and they don't have any idea about these things. Okay, so and by the way, this is the entire system. Okay, this is the entire system, and you say, well, there's so much noise, so much things around us that maybe something else is influencing, the magnets. And no, look, here you'll see it. This is done in outer space. This is an astronaut holding magnets in outer space, and you can see that they're floating, and they do attract each other even in space. And if he does it outside the craft, it's going to be the same thing. Okay, in other words, magnets work in outer space, whereas, for example, sound doesn't. You can't send sound right through, through the vacuum. But you can send, but magnetism does penetrate the vacuum for some reason. Okay. Okay. So that's my personal opinion. I think that all these particle physicists don't have any right to talk anymore because they failed for 3,000 years. Okay. What are the more objective reasons I have? Okay, for why everyone can't just present their theory. Let's assume there's a conference. Mr. Jones comes to the conference. He comes in with his presentation. Okay, Mr. Jones, you have the floor. Go ahead and tell us your theory. And so Mr. Jones begins to talk. He says, okay, I have a theory. I think Napoleon went to Waterloo because he wanted to have his name on the books in history forever. Stop the microphone. Mr. Jones, this is a physics conference. You know, here, we're all physicists here. We think you're in the wrong conference. The history conference is down the hall. You're in the wrong conference. Should Mr. Jones be allowed to speak about history in a conference about physics? He's out of topic. So he no. I say he's not allowed to talk. Not in there. Next. Yes, sir. What's your name? My name is Wall Thornhill. Hopefully you're on topic. You're going to talk about physics? Yeah, we're going to talk about physics. Okay, good. And you have the floor, sir. Go ahead. And so Wall Thornhill comes out there and he says, okay, and we have these filaments out there. Okay, we have filaments. And what are those filaments? Well, those are electricity going from one galaxy to the next, from one star to the next. And that's because there's all this plasma out there that serves as a medium. Mr. Thornhill, what is electricity? I don't know. I have no idea. No clue. You have no clue what electricity is? And yeah, we showed that last week, just in case, okay? Here it is. The electric universe does not have a definition of their favorite word. Okay, they're called the electric universe. And Mr. Thornhill and his buddies, they can't define the word electricity. In fact, they say electricity is a fundamental quality of matter, so it is used to characterize other things. Thus, consensus opinion is lacking precision. Like all bedrock presumptions such as gravity or time, reducing electric terminology into smaller units is impossible because it lies at the bottom of the lexical well. So here are these people. They have no idea what electricity is, but they're going to do their universe. They're the way the universe works, they're going to do it with electricity. How do they define electricity? The best they could give it, the best shot they could give it. We define it as the flow of electric charge. Charge is a concept. So they have the flow of charges, but then they say it travels. The flow travels. And you have electromagnetic energy, a concept, and that flows also. And then he says electricity moves. So we have the flow that is moving. Oh, great. So these people have no definition of electricity, and then they have all these ridiculous definitions like, the flow of flows. And so, yeah, you say, what do you mean the flow? And, Thornhill might say, well, no, we really have an idea. See, it's all these electron beads that go from atom to atom. And it looks more or less like this. I showed this previously, okay? And here you have the general idea that people who have very tiny brains have of electricity. They think it's the flow of electron beads from one atom to the other. That's what you're taught in high school, and that's what people repeat like parrots. And so the question is, well, Mr. Thornhill, before you move your electron bead from atom to atom, could you please tell us what holds the electron bead to the nucleus? What physical object prevents the electron from flying away, from ionizing? Or why doesn't the electron fall into the negative electron into the positive proton? What keeps it from falling? What keeps it from flying away? What physical object is there? And yeah, the problem is that they can't begin by drawing you their atom. They can't illustrate their atom. No one can illustrate their atom, because whatever they illustrate is garbage, especially if they're going to put particles. Because the only issue they have to answer is what keeps the electron bead tied to the nucleus. What are they going to put in between? More particles? So yeah, here you have the EU atom. More or less looks like Bohr's planetary atom. You have all these little beads flying around. You say, well, what keeps that little bead tied to the nucleus? And of course, they'll never be able to answer that question. That's the problem. They can't draw their atom before they begin their presentation. So no, Mr. Thornhill is not allowed to present his theory until he first fixes his definitions and until he fixes his assumptions. He can't even rationalize his assumption. You're going to allow him to go into the theory? No way. Next. Okay, who's next? Yeah, my name is Dave the Hilster, and now that Bill Gates has left the room, I'm going to present my particle theory. Okay, so let's hear your particle theory. Okay, and he goes in there and he says the following. He says, this is what I propose. I propose we have the G1 and the G2 and the N1 and the N2 particles. And what these particles will do, they'll create gravity. Mr. De Hilster, what's the black stuff? The black stuff? Yeah, all these particles, they're surrounded, they're encapsulated by some black medium. What is that black stuff? Oh, I have no clue. I don't know. See, the theory is in its infancy. We still have to develop it, so we're still working on it. Well, Mr. De Hilster, why don't you come back when you can answer that question? And while you're at it, why don't you do something else and tell us when you come back, right? Whether you're ether, and by the way, the father calls them G1, G2s, etc., and the son says, yeah, you're talking about the ether. Because that's what it is. It's particles in space. That's what the ether is. That's what it's always has been. And there's a little difference. I'll go over that in a minute. But this is the point. The point is that, we say, is your ether infinite or finite? That's what we need to find out, And you say, oh yeah, my ether is infinite. And he says that in a discussion with Glenn Borchardt, okay, where this guy talks about the infinite universe, and he agrees, this ether that they are proposing is infinite. And so we get to the point where we have that problem that I discussed the other day in more detail in another video. I'm just going to go lightly over here. And that's this issue. We have the finite ether and the infinite ether. And these people are proposing the guy on the right. They're saying the infinite ether. And the first problem is the black stuff. And then the second part is that infinite is an irrational term. Anyone using the word infinite should be executed, tortured to death, burned at the stake. Because an object is that which has shape. It's a synonym of finite. You cannot say your ether is infinite because that's not an object. Well, what are you saying? You're saying that God creates more particles as you try to reach the edge of matter? Is that what you're saying? What does infinite mean? There is no such thing as an object that is infinite. And if you're going to treat your ether as an object, then you can't say it's infinite. You have to put something around it. And when you put something around it, now you have to identify. You say, well, what is that black stuff? And that's the problem. So, no, Mr. D. Hilster is not allowed to speak either because we're not going to get to his theory. He's not done with his assumptions. His assumption right now, he's still working on it. And he says it's infinite, which is irrational. So no, he's not allowed to speak. He's not allowed to tell us his theory. We can't get to the theory. We can't even get past the assumptions. And again, we have to look at his definitions of what an object is, what is a thing, what is nothing. These are the words that he's got to define before he begins to talk at the physics conference. All these people have to go into kindergarten physics. They're in the wrong conference. You got to be next door with the toddlers. They can't go over there and talk about college theories if they have not gone through baby physics. They have to go through this learning curve. And they haven't done the basics. And that's the whole problem with the John Chapel Society. Okay, so to summarize what I've said so far, because I'm going to get into the gravitational theory of the De Hilsters, okay? And let's summarize what's wrong with all these groups. The fatal problems of all dissidents of mathematical physics, and essentially they're all in the same boat, the dissidents and the establishment. They don't define their strategic words, okay? The ones that make or break their theories. And they're using the same words as mainstream, move concepts around. And here's just a small percentage of them. I had much more words the other day, but energy, field, wave, plasma, current, vortex, ether, anyone using these words, is not a physicist, is not a scientist. He's introducing spirits and ghosts into science. And then the other issue is that all these people say that space is made of something or filled with something. They use the word made or filled. They say filled, but they insinuate made. And it's made out of energy, negative, positive particles, fields, vibrations, dark matter, all this nonsense that all these people have invented. And so, yeah, they're all in the same boat as far as I'm concerned. None of them have a right to speak in physics. Okay, they can speak in religion, they can speak at their Sunday school, but not in physics. Okay, let's get to the theory. Let's get to the G1 gravitational theory made of particles. Okay, the G1 particle. First, I just want to mention this. This starts, you say, what's the John Chapel Society? Who was John Chappell? John Chapel. And it's this fellow here, okay? This is why they used his name. And he was an ether guy as well. And he's the founder of what I call the First Baptist Church of Dissidents. He collected all these dissidents. And why am I against this? Because all these dissidents, a lot of them are intelligent people. They're intelligent laymen. And they realize that what the mathematical establishment is proposing is garbage, absolute nonsense, total poppycock. Black holes, Big Bang, particles that travel backwards in time. They got all this garbage out there. And so all these people say, something is wrong with this. But these guys feel powerless, and they join groups that criticize the establishment, and they find, groups like the Electric Universe and the John Chapel, Natural Philosophy Society. And, this guy believed in ether. Okay. And most of these guys are ether. In fact, they're all ether. In fact, even the Hilsters are ether people, whether they recognize it or not. And so what is the ether? Well, we had already John Bernoulli tell us already in the 17th century, and because this went on from the 17th all the way to the 18th, all the way to the 19th century. In fact, it's still alive today. He pretty much characterized what the ether is in the 18th century, mid 18th century, 1742. And he says there's two kinds of matter. And then if you go to the bottom, he says in darker blue there, matter of the primal element, being perfectly fluid without coherence. Look at all the magical properties he puts in there. Presents no resistance to bodies moving within it. For the resistance of fluids comes only from the inertia of the molecules of which they are composed. Okay, so that pretty much characterizes what the ether is even to this day. They created this ghost, this spirit they call ether, and that's what they're going to move around. They're going to work with the ether. And of course, the Hilster's particles are essentially the ether. Because what he's going to do, he's going to take all these G1 and G2 and N1 and N2 particles. There's more, he says. There's probably more out there, so they're still inventing more particles. They've got all these particles, and it forms this background. But the background is the background of itself, which is like the fractal woman the other day. She says the BEC, the Bose-Einstein condensate, is the background for the Bose-Einstein condensate. So they always elude the question. They never answer the question. What is the background? That's the question we want answered. What is space? Forget about matter. We want to know what space is. Okay? And these guys elude the questions. Okay. So, the other day I mentioned some of the questions that these people would have to answer. Maybe I should put this up here. These are the questions that are required of people who propose ether. Okay? Does the ether fill space, or is the ether equal to space? These are two different words. One is filled, the other one is made of. Then what encapsulates each particle that constitutes the ether is space. If space contours each particle of ether, what is space? Define or draw space, one or the other. It's a concept or an object. Okay? Is space or the ether infinite or finite? If space is finite, what medium encapsulates space? And is the ether within the infinite space infinite or finite? These are the questions a proponent of any kind of ether particle theorist has to answer. Okay, so yeah, these are the type of questions that are required of them. Okay. Okay. So what does D. Hilster propose? Okay, he starts out by saying the following. He says that how he came about his particle theory. And he says, look, what I needed was to make a solution to gravity, concluding it must be a very low frequency and low intensity wave. Okay, the first problem, we have the word wave. The second issue is that he's going to introduce mathematics. Mathematics has nothing to do with science or with physics. In science, we do not use mathematics. In physics, we do not use mathematics. And you say, Bill, you're crazy. You're totally, you're a loony. What are you saying? We've been using mathematics at least since the days of Descartes and Galileo and Newton. What is the purpose of physics? What is science about? The purpose of physics is to tell me mechanisms. I need to find out what the mechanism is of gravity and of, magnetism. I need to know how these things, how Mother Nature does these magic tricks. I don't need any math at all to figure this out. And I don't need any math at all to figure out why the pen falls to the floor, to the center of the earth. And we only have two objects, the pen and the earth, essentially. Or we have the moon and the earth. There's only two rocks. I mean, if you can't explain that, I mean, if that's over your head, two objects attracted, all we have to figure out what invisible object, what entity, medium, Mother Nature is putting in between the two rocks, between the two magnets. That's what we have to figure out. And that doesn't require computers or anything like that. In fact, all we have is two proposals on the table. One is particles, which make up fields, waves, etc., 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 etc. It's all particles. And the other one is the rope model. The rope model is swinging threads, very for magnetism. It's a totally different model, not based on particles or waves or any of that nonsense these people have invented over the centuries. We have a different model now for the first time in history. Okay, so what is the mechanism, according to Mr. Hilster, for gravity? Well, here, this pretty much summarizes. You'll find this in their website. It says G1 particles come from all the stars in the universe. The particles come at the Earth from all directions. When the G1 hits, it not only scatters, but it pushes the atom. This results in fewer G1s leaving the Earth. Here's the critical part. Fewer particle G1s leaving the Earth than are entering. So as you can see on the upper right there, he's got the arrows pointing towards the Earth because there's a net flow of particles towards the Earth. There's more of them coming in than going out. That's going to be his essentially that's going to be his mechanism. An object on the surface of the Earth is constantly being pushed up by fewer G1s, I'm sorry, and pushed down by more G1s, giving a net pushing force downward toward the gravitational center of the Earth. Okay? And the loss of G1s through the Earth causes a reduction of the G1s towards the Moon. Hence, there are more G1s pushing the Moon towards the Earth than there are G1s pushing the Moon away from the Earth. Okay, I think you get the idea here. It's going to be a push gravity theory, made with particles. Okay, that's what the Hilsters are proposing. And I've got one here, but I think I'm going to skip it for brevity. And so here, let's see if I can put this one up here. They explain how the moon, we'll go directly to the example, how the moon is attracted. Now the pictures on the bottom, I've modified them just to give you the idea of how his theory works. Essentially, there are more forces pushing on the Earth towards the moon than there are forces pushing the Earth away from the moon. And likewise, you have so many particles pushing on the moon from the outside, then you have pushing on the moon from the Earth vantage point. Okay, and that's how they're pushed from the outside inwards. That's how they're going to explain their famous gravity. Okay, so this is going to be the mechanism for the moon, and so let's see if we can illustrate what the Hilsters have in mind. Okay, let's see. Here it is. Okay, so I've illustrated what I think they have in mind, and here they have all these particles emanating from the moon going to the earth, particles from the earth going to the moon, but there's more particle behind them than there are in front of them. Okay, so this is a dynamic version essentially of what they're proposing. Okay, okay, so we have a lot of noise there, too much noise, and so we need to clear that up and find out if we can clean it up a little bit. And so what I'm proposing is let's do it this way. Let's get rid of all the matter in the universe, and we only have two objects in the entire universe. We have empty space, completely empty space, nothing out there, and we go with what the Hilsters are proposing. We have a net flow of particles, in from the moon to the earth and from the earth to the moon, but there's no outside particles pushing the moon towards the earth or no outside particles pushing the earth towards the moon. All we have is the repulsive particles sent by the moon to the earth and vice versa. Okay, so all we have is repulsion. And again, because they're saying that more particles arrive on the earth and leave and vice versa, or the same, I guess, for the moon. More particles are arriving at the moon than are leaving the moon. And so the question is, this violates already Newton's equation. Mass times mass divided by distance squared. These guys should be attracting each other, and here they're repulsing each other. And as a final note, I'm going to put my system so we compare them side by side, so you know what to compare it against, if I can find it here. Got so many of these sometimes. Okay, here's the rope model versus the Hilster model, so that you can compare them side by side and get an idea against. This is not to persuade you or convince you. I'm just showing objectively what they're proposing and what I'm proposing. This is not about recruiting. This is not about convincing, persuading. Essentially what the Hilsters are proposing, they've got an ether there, and they have a vibration. And the funny part is that the Hilster had to turn his wavy wave, the gravitational wave, into a straight line. So he's got a flat or a straight wave. That's part of the funny part. But I put it the finite ether there. Essentially, they have an infinite ether, obviously, because they don't want to answer the question of what the ether is, or what encapsulates, or what it looks like. Okay, and an object is that which has shape, and so I had to put it as the ether as a finite entity. But essentially, they're saying there's a waving of these particles, because he's trying to reconcile wave with particle. And here the wave is vibrating quite a bit. In his model, the wave is a straight line, essentially. And on the right, you have my model. All atoms in the universe are interconnected, physically interconnected by ropes, the electromagnetic rope. Light is a torsion of the rope. That's why it has this wavy nature that fits what's his name, James Maxwell's equation perfectly. C equals the wave equation, which was really devised by several people, not only by James Maxwell, but essentially you have C equals frequency times wavelength. Frequency and wavelength are opposites. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, here you have a rope, okay? And now you know why the speed of light is constant between any two atoms in the universe. The speed of light never increases or decreases anywhere in the universe. So what the mathematicians did was they invented refractive index, which is what I used in the industry when I worked there. And if you want to know how fast light is through glass, well, you have to divide the speed of light by 145. They have 1.5, but we used 1.45 in the industry. And so that comes out to around 200,000 kilometers per second. So they say, look, light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second through the vacuum, which is not vacuum. It's full of all kinds of trash. It's got energy, virtual particles, fields. It's got all kinds of garbage. But light doesn't seem to mind. It just goes at 300,000 kilometers per second. But what happens when it comes into glass? Well, they say, well, now it slows down. It hits a brick wall. And so the speed of light is slowed down. And then when it goes on the other side, it somehow speeds up. It gets all this energy and starts going back at 300,000 kilometers per second. And now, under the rope model, between all atoms in the universe are interconnected by an electromagnetic, not wave, but a rope, a physical rope. There's a twined pair of threads, DNA-like threads. That's what binds any two atoms. Okay, and now what is light? Is a torsion. You torque the rope, and there you got light. And yeah, that signal, what we measure, what we typically try to measure the speed of light, what we're measuring is the torsion. And torsion is the fastest wave that you can imagine. It's faster than transverse waves, which are the slowest waves. It's faster than longitudinal waves, which are a little faster than transverse waves. You can see that. You can look it up during earthquakes. Longitudinal waves go faster than transverse wave. And you can see why, because the transverse wave has to go up and down. The other guy goes straight. It's got to be faster. You move the slinky back and forth. It's got to go faster than if you move the slinky up and down. Okay, the waves has to go slower. This beats both of them by, an unimaginable quantity. You just put two clothespins on your grandmother's, clothesline. You touch one of them, the other one moves instantaneously. That's how fast the torsion wave, to use that term, torsion wave goes. But the object is a physical pair of threads, twined pair of threads. And yeah, now you can see why the speed of light is constant. 300,000 kilometers per second between any two atoms, no matter what they belong to, air, water, solids, it doesn't matter. And why? Because you can see here you have many links, okay? And what changes is the frequency in exchange for the wavelength. So now the wavelength becomes longer, okay? Wavelength becomes longer and you have fewer links. So frequency went down and wavelength has gone up. Now you see why the speed of light is a constant and why the equation C equals frequency times wavelength, they're inversely proportional, is the equation of a rope. And this is what these people failed to discover in the last 400 years, in my humble opinion. Okay, so let's compare them again. Here you see gravity according to Bill Gates and according to the Hilsters. And they do this with very complex particles and so on. What we're saying, all atoms are interconnected. They send torsion waves, if we want to use that language, between atom to atom. That's going to be light. And then what is gravity? Well, gravity is simply as two objects approach each other. Since all atoms in the universe are interconnected, physically interconnected, as they approach each other, the ropes fan out. And you can see that in a dynamic situation down at the bottom. As they approach each other, the ropes are fanning out. And that's the acceleration of gravity. That's the physical cause of the acceleration of gravity. So you have something to compare it against. You can get the particle model of the Hilsters, the rope model of Bill Gates, or you can get space-time. That's an even more beautiful theory. You have the warpage of space-time. Time warps, bends. Okay, the fishnet. Okay, with that, I'm going to continue probably with second half of the Hilster's theory on Wednesday. I'm going to be looking at magnetism. I'll be looking at their atom. I'll be looking at their version of electricity and some of the other things that the Hilster has come up with. I think it's worth criticizing and offering you an alternative for those. I'll see you on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.